right, so we're going to talk about the writing process today. And first of all, how many people here love to write?
Several.
Those of you who love to write, did you always love to write? No, it's definitely something that doesn't always bring joy. And for learners, I mean, I love to write too. I don't do it as a hobby, but I find that when I do, it's a nice process, and I enjoy it, and I don't think I'm horrible at it. So I'm not afraid to do it. But a lot of learners are afraid to write. And what do you think could be some of the reasons that I'm going to actually stop for a second so we can talk about this? Either put in the chat or just go ahead and raise your hands and let us know. What do you think some of the reasons are that learners are reluctant to write? Christine.
The learner I have now is just thinks that his handwriting is not good, and apparently his last tutor sort of reinforced that the importance of having like really good handwriting, which I keep trying to tell him as long as we can read it, it's fine. But yeah, that's why.
Yeah. How many doctors have really terrible handwriting, right? That's the joke.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have some great spelling issues, grammar problems or misspellings, lack of vocabulary, fear of making mistakes. They don't know how to begin, and they're afraid of writing poorly, being self-conscious, understanding syntax, confidence. They're concerned about their spelling and grammar. They don't know how to start, don't think they can organize their thoughts, mind block. I agree with their fear of spelling for sure. It's a very observable fear, even though we might recognize that they have greater weaknesses. Yeah,
Jenny, yeah.
It's right there for everybody to see.
Yes.
Don't feel they have something to say. Lack of practice, putting ideas together.
This is excellent, you guys. I could just stop sharing my slides completely because you get it. You completely understand. All of these are reasons that learners have a really difficult time. They don't understand that it's a learned process.
Oh, and you know what? We have a great comment from Susan, and I'd love to explore it with her because she says my ESL learner did not want to write at first. Now she'll bring me stories in our sessions without me asking her to write. So, wow, Susan, what made that difference? Susan Corona. Does your mic work, Susan?
Mm-hmm.
There, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm new at the literacy coordinator gig. So I haven't been there very long. And my ESL learner she's really very determined. She wants to get her GED. And I explained to her that her writing would help her with the reading, and there might be some writing on the GED. That seemed to help. And I noticed that it's also an outlet for her to put some stuff down. She's been going through some things. I explained to her that journaling is real helpful. So that's also, I think, helpful for her. But I noticed that just taking the pressure off of it, there's no pressure. The first time I said, I would like you to do this, and I kind of made it a thing she had to do for me, had to. And then as the time went on, it's like, well, if you want to write something, great. And if you don't, that's fine too. And I noticed I don't have to ask her anymore. She just does it.
That's great.
So that's yeah.
That's great. Well,
you covered so many good points there thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Actually, she's self-motivated now because she sees how it's tied to her goal. And that's huge. And then, as you said, no pressure. And journals, I'm a huge fan of having learners get exposed to journal writing because 9 out of 10 of the things that you put in the chat are addressed by using a journal because they don't have to worry about spelling or grammar or punctuation or anything. It's not corrected. So if anybody has background noise, they could mute, that would help. Okay, so I'm going to go back to get started with our slides here. So many learners just don't understand the process either, especially if they're, I mean, with journal writing, they can just write. But if they're writing something that's going to be seen by anyone else, and they want to produce something that they're proud of, they don't realize that it takes many, many hours, sometimes weeks, months, years, to produce something that's satisfactory to the author. And that varies depending on your audience and your goals for writing and your purpose for writing and your hope, your hopeful outcome. But even at the simplest level of just writing for practice, they don't realize that there's a cycle to it. And it's helpful to explain that, just like with everything else. If you explain what you're going to do in detail, really specific instruction, and then go through those steps with them, the I do, we do, you do strategy blended with this specific explanation, it's helpful. So I remembered hearing that the Harry Potter book was a really lengthy process for J.K. Rowling's. And I think I did Google it this week, but I've already forgotten. I think it was 8 to 9 years for her to write the first book. 8 to 9 years. She had to go through this cycle many, many, many times. And she wrote it in fits and starts. She was a single mom and working. And this is how she got through it, just by doing it in bits and pieces until it all came together. But for starters, the pre-writing can be very fun. You need to decide on what you're going to write about. That's the first step. And get some information about what you're going to write about. If it's something that needs gathering of data, that could be note taking. If you're reading an article and you want to write something about it to practice your comprehension, to organize your thoughts on paper after you've read something. Free writing is not the same as formal writing or functional writing, but free writing is like a journal or anything where you're not going to be going through and doing a lot of editing right away. You're just getting your ideas down on paper. You're not going to be correcting at this point. Brainstorming with your tutor or with your friend, or doing a mind map, or any kind of brainstorming you can come up with verbally, figuring out what's going to be the topic and how am I going to get my information. Then once you have your topic figured out, there's a planning stage. So that would be when you're organizing your ideas and really focusing, not just the big general idea, but what part of that topic do I want to focus on? And mind mapping, cloud clusters, lists, outlines. Those are all great skills to work on with your learner in a session, and can also help them feel more confident. That was one of the things that you guys mentioned, was confidence. If they see that there's a process that they can use step by step, a lot of people don't know that they can use these tools. We have a great training video I'll put on the Padlet on mind mapping that we use in the tutor training in Santa Clara. And at the end, the woman says, the learner says, I didn't know that I could use something like this to get my thoughts on paper. She didn't know that a mind map could help her organize, and that it was okay to just play with, paper and pencil. I think a lot of learners feel like they have to, start writing in sentence form and have it be correct. And these tools in the beginning show them that it's really messy in the beginning, and that's okay. Then writing the initial drafts and just focusing on what do you want to include? What is, maybe you could leave that out. Let's read it with or without that sentence. One way for more kinesthetic learners to do this, or anybody, or visual learners, is if they have a text written out and they've double spaced, for instance, on binder paper or something, you can cut those into strips. And let's say you have 5 sentences, you can rearrange the order of the sentences on the table and decide if it reads better this way or that way. Take a sentence out, set it over to the side. There's different ways you can use the outlines and so forth in the same way, just crossing things out or moving things down. All of these things are good tools for them to practice and learn. And so organizing, and then also if you have an idea in there that you're going to keep, maybe the tutor can be the guide and say, well, do we need to add more information? Does this particular idea need to be fleshed out more? What can we add to make this more interesting? Or what I'm curious to know is what happened when X did Y, and then have the learner go back and add that into a draft. Sometimes it's okay to take a break and say, okay, we've worked on that, and let's come back to it next time we meet and think about it. Learners absolutely will need to use, many lesson plans, if not weeks, to produce something sometimes. And sometimes it can be short. Other times they can produce something really impressive if they take the time to go through all of these steps, and then that really builds their confidence as well. So the peer and tutor review as we go through this cycle is to either have other learners, if you're in a small group, they can read each other's and give feedback. Or if it's simply a one-on-one situation, then you can read and give feedback. We have an excellent video on that with Amy talking about, I can't remember the title of the video. Do you know, Kathy? It's the one about responding to writing. It's called Responding to Writing, and it's excellent. And it gives you a tool for helping to address the mechanics at some point, but also in the beginning when you're just working on the expression and getting the ideas on paper. You don't want to be trying to go back and forth and correct all the spelling or, hone in on all the things that are incorrect in it. You really want to just make sure that all the ideas and the expression is down and that the learner's happy with that part of it before you dive into the more mechanical parts of editing and proofing. So in the revision stage, after you've given feedback, that the best way in this video, it's described really well, is to say something first that you like about the writing. Absolutely make it a positive statement, the very first thing, and make it really specific. Tell them why you like it. It could be something as simple as, I really like this sentence because I can picture your main character driving that car. And that could be it. And then you may focus on some of the things that seem like aren't as well fleshed out or thought through, and ask questions. Ask for clarification. Ask for more information rather than saying, well, it seems kind of short, and I'm not sure that it's enough of a story yet. That's too vague for a learner. You really need to ask them questions and point out the things that you as a reader are curious about to help them develop their story. Sometimes they may need to go back and do more idea generation and more organization and go around that loop another time or two. And then at some point, you're going to do the actual editing and proofreading, which is mechanics. You're working on the text itself, but the emotional part of it, which is sometimes the hardest part for a learner, is all done before that. And I think a lot of times learners have had negative experiences where they get a paper back in school and it's all marked up and it's overwhelming. So hopefully we'll show you some good examples as we go on in the training and the videos of how to address the mechanics without, deflating the learner's enthusiasm for writing. So as I just showed you in a cycle, this is sort of a bullet list of the same topics. So the first things are the planning and pre-writing, and those are oftentimes just brainstorming activities. And the mind map video is really a good illustration. If some of you tutors have never done a mind map with your learner, it can be used for comprehension and it can also be used for writing. So I think we show that in both of the videos that will be on the Padlet. And then just the drafting, no corrections are done at that point. The revising and the feedback, again, you're revising the ideas and the organization, and you're giving positive feedback and helpful suggestions or questions to elicit more expression. And then the editing happens. And then the publishing. So the publishing in this case for some learners could be just sharing the final product with their spouse or with you or with a reading program that has a book of learner writings or an event at the library or a writer to writer contest or something like that. We've already covered this. You guys did such an amazing job. This is the real thing, is helping learners get over their reluctance. And the best way to do that is to remove the judgment and the pressure. And which is, again, why the holding back on your urge as a teacher or a tutor to make corrections in the beginning, it's really empowering for learners to see that they can go through this process without having all of their mistakes pointed out, because you'll get to that in a kind and compassionate way when you get to the editing. And then they'll see that as just part of the process. So as you guys all mentioned, they often think they don't have anything to say, partly because they don't have the words to express or the vocabulary. You can help them with that by teaching them how to use a thesaurus during some of the drafts if you want. Sometimes they just don't have the confidence because they're used to kind of sitting in the shadows and not feeling like their opinion is valuable. And obviously their mechanical writing skills sometimes hold them back, but this is a way to get them through that. So again, this expressive portion of the cycle shows them that they don't have to be perfect. We call the early stages of writing creative spelling or sloppy spelling. And that's fine. Someone else mentioned about handwriting. If you can make sense of it as a tutor and you can get the gist of what they're trying to say, even if a word is misspelled, that's okay. That's fine. And if you are going to help them with those items, you as the tutor need to be making copious notes in your little parking lot to make sure that you go back during the mechanical portion and systematically work on different skills that they need improvement in. So if they're afraid of making all those mistakes, you're going to gently introduce corrections to those things through systematic instruction.
And Marilyn Shoshi had her hand raised.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Go ahead.
Oh, no problem. I can jump in afterwards. It's kind of commentary, and I wanted to hear your thoughts as well.
Oh, okay. Well, we're kind of just recapping on what you guys all already said. Judging, being criticized or laughed at or judged for their poor handwriting or not being able to express their ideas as well as when they speak. And as Kathy has pointed out, sometimes their oral vocabulary is so much better than their written or reading vocabulary, their sight. So sometimes one way to do it would be to let them start expressing their ideas by recording their voice and then see if they can capture that on paper. If they have something they really want to say and they know how to say it, but they don't know how to write it, you can help them by transposing it from a video, audio tape. Yeah, feeling like nobody cares what they have to say. So why would anybody want to read their writing? If any of you in the programs have participated or had a book of learner writings or a collection that's done each year by the learners, I think sometimes because learners' writings are so distilled, if you will, I think they are more powerful than people who have huge vocabularies and 10,000 words. I think sometimes 1 to 300 words can be, a tearjerker. Yeah, this is a great thing to tell your learners. If you can think it, you can say it. And if you can say it, you can write it. So even if that means the tutor starts out by writing it for them, and then they can copy it. So that's known as the language experience story, or a technique called language experience. And if you have a low-level learner that's very reluctant to write, sometimes you can just engage them in a conversation or find a topic that they have something to say about, even if that's just talking about their children or their job. And you can start writing about that. We have a video that demonstrates step by step how you do that. And then you give them an opportunity to read it with you and read it themselves. So again, it's I do, we do, you do. And then they can elaborate on it and start building. A lot of the learner writings that came out of the Read Santa Clara program started out as a language experience story where the tutor was the scribe for the first draft. So it's really important to start from the get-go at whatever level your learner is to make time for some writing. It could even be, as little as a few sentences, and it could be copying, but writing is important because there is, evidence that the neurological connection from the hand to the brain just helps with learning and with incorporating language and the code, as Kathy said, the code of language into the brain, and it creates different neural pathways than reading does. So even though your learner is reluctant, you have to explain to them that it's beneficial and that they'll see more progress if they are writing as much as they are reading. So we always say you have to include reading, writing, speaking, and listening in every lesson plan. And so somebody else said this already, but it's so true. Making mistakes is fine. It's how you learn, and it's how you connect what you know to what you need to know. And that happens a lot during the editing process, because in the expressive process, you're making it safe for the learner to take risks and to make mistakes and to learn and grow and take, express themselves freely without fear of judgment. And so when you get to the mechanical stage, or the editing and publishing stage, the level of editing that you do will depend somewhat on the intended audience. Sometimes you could just do an expressive writing activity and make no corrections. Let it go. You're done. You got your words on paper. If nobody needs to read it, you maybe don't need to work on that particular writing with all that editing. But you as a tutor will have gained so much information about their spelling abilities, their punctuation, their grammar, and all the gaps that they might need teaching. So start with small, easy stuff. And sometimes we've talked about practice at home or outside of your lessons. Asking someone to write, they may not have a place or an opportunity or time to write, but if they maybe keep a little journal and you spend the first 5 minutes of your lesson writing in your journals, you could do that. There's a whole bunch of different journal possibilities that I think we're going to go over. And, with everything you do with a learner, you just have to build, incrementally from small to big. Do you want to go ahead and give us your comment now before I go on? Joshi?
Yeah, this is all so huge. I feel, I think I've encountered a few learners and even volunteers, students that come from the high school, for example, um, where we kind of get stuck at a point when we ask questions like, how do you feel? Or what do you think? What did you do? And sometimes answers are very short.
Mhm.
And even in conversation. So, and I feel that there, a lot of the fears here, noted for the writing is even reflected in how they even speak sometimes. So I've noticed that even with some of the high school students that, they're in high school, they're doing other things. They're not art learners necessarily, but the answers, you still have to ask really good detailed questions to kind of get the ball rolling a little better. And so
Absolutely.
I think that is so big for the tutors to keep in mind. And it's just a phenomenon that just right now I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so real. It all ties in, and I'm not gonna lie. Sometimes I'll even have a hard time at work. Oh, what did you do? Oh my gosh, what did I do? I worked. you know,
Yeah.
and it's like, let me get. How do I dig a little deeper? And sometimes it can be upbringing. It can be a lot of factors,
And
possible
we've talked about,
traumas,
yeah.
and things that can really be affecting how they express themselves overall in general. And so tutors end up being so helpful for learners in a holistic point of view.
Well, and
See if
your
anyone resonated with that.
points are fantastic because it is some of it, if we've talked about, could be cultural. There's just a real reluctance to share and to verbalize, when you're in the presence of a teacher or some of it can be just that feeling like I get all tongue-tied and I don't have the right words and I can't use enough words to really say what I'm thinking, or I don't pick the right words when it comes out of my mouth. So it can be, yeah, both verbal and written. And so that negative self-talk that they're having in their head, we need to help them replace with really positive self-talk. And we can do that by being positive when we talk to them and removing that judgment, I think, from the beginning. And
And
so,
also just using the phrase, that is so interesting. Please tell me more. Or
Mhm.
I'd love to know more about that. And then you'll see later, there's a strategy called ask defining questions. So ask clarifying questions, ask, detailed questions, which you said, and just try to elicit more information either in writing and speaking. And I've had learners who are much more comfortable speaking than writing, and learners that are just the opposite. And so if they're having a reluctance to express themselves, maybe say, you know what, if you feel more comfortable writing than speaking, why don't you write it? And then, you can read it out to me or I can read it out to you, and just the opposite. So just but practice and finding that comfort level, and the more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Mhm.
Thanks for
Absolutely.
switching.
Yep. So another thing I really like, other than making writing fun, and that could be, the topics that you're writing about, and just the way you go about it. But writing with your learners is a really important thing. So we've talked about sort of sitting side by side or sitting, perpendicular to your learner at the table. So you're kind of working closely together. And I think whenever you have a learner practicing writing in the session, if you're allowing 5 or 10 minutes for that, it's really important for the tutor to do the same thing at the same time. And then you compare, you can read to each other what you've written. So it's the we do part. But you're acting as peers and you're showing them that, yours isn't always perfect either, or you might want to make changes to yours. And it's interesting for them to see what you write about if you're writing on the same topic. There's great videos in the collection for tutor ready writing that show this. There's also simple things you can do in a person's daily life, like writing a thank you note or a birthday card, things like that, to just give them practice and let them know that they can still use those steps. Brainstorm, what do you want to write? How are you going to express what you want to say to the person in this thank you note? And should we practice writing it out so we make sure that the words are all spelled correctly before you put it in that expensive card? There's different ways you can help them get over all of those negative thoughts in their heads that would keep them from doing some things with writing. And then I love this one, calling people authors instead of learners. You're the author. As the author, what do you want me to know when you write this story? What do we want to know as the author? What do you want me to remember about this character? Or as the author, do you think we should add anything to this? Just giving them that respect. Susan, go ahead, or Sue.
Yes, I was just wondering, these days everyone's texting. So do you ever use texting in a tutoring situation where the learner would text you and then you would text back to them? That way they don't have to worry about their handwriting.
Right.
Get a conversation. I don't know. I was just curious.
Yeah, and I use this all the time with my learners. They prefer WhatsApp, and so they encouraged me to join WhatsApp. And so I often, will send them messages. They will send me messages, and I never correct it's like a journal, right? I never correct their writing, but if they have made a mistake, then I will rephrase what they have said in the correct way so that they can then see the correct grammar, spelling, punctuation, whatever it is. And so, yeah, texting is great for and it's genuine communication, right? It's real life, genuine communication.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Joy.
Yeah. And Joy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about texting for ESL learners. Some of my tutors have commented that they text back and forth with their learners for scheduling and such, but they found that the learners are using some kind of translator. So they're not actually practicing their English and texting. And so I think in those cases, texting is not ideal.
Mm-hmm.
It would be writing practice, but they're not practicing their English. So
and you can
there's pros and cons to texting.
Yeah, I mean, you could say, please don't use a translator, right? I know it's easier that way, but please don't. And hopefully they would honor that.
Yeah. Well, and I do think it's a good tool, and I think it's like Kathy said, it's a nice way to practice if they're doing it authentically instead of through a translator. But I also think it's super important to have that physical practice of writing with their hand and learning how to form those letters, and just the act of writing is for the brain very different than the act of texting. So if you are able to meet with your learner in person, and you can use both, certainly, but I think that the process of writing is really a gift that you can help your learner develop.
In that regard, what about these days? They don't really teach cursive in the schools. I guess they're going back to cursive. So does it matter when you're working with your learner whether they're using the cursive or using?
My opinion is that if it's legible, if you can read and understand what they're trying to convey, it's fine.
Thanks.
I had a learner that alternated capitals and lowercase letters like crazy. In my opinion, they were capitals, but in his opinion, that was just his script. That was how he wrote. And they weren't the wrong letters, and I could read his writing. So there just wasn't enough time to worry about that. He was working on expressing himself and spelling and grammar. So penmanship was the least of our worries, but
But
also
that's
to
actually
that point.
a great point, Marilyn, because you as the tutor, I know a lot of people write in block capitals, right? And that is very confusing if you are trying to teach capitalization. So if you are one of those people, please, when you are writing something to your learner, please make sure that you use upper and lowercase letters so that you're modeling correct capitalization.
And if you have fancy writing, make sure you're printing for them because your script could be hard for them to decode.
Yeah, a lot of people simply can't read cursive writing. They have never been exposed to it and they don't know. And you know, we don't encounter cursive writing in printed materials.
Right.
It is print. So
Yeah. Yeah. So it's best to model that. And then speaking of modeling, as you saw in the video, modeling think alouds can be done with writing as well as with reading. So you can show a learner how different stages of the writing process can be done through the think aloud strategy. The other thing, and this addresses all of those fears we've been talking about, is creating an environment that's just very positive and encouraging. So the collaborative writing, as I said, where it could be just you and your learner, or it could be paired up with another learner or a small group. And if you are working with learner on learner combinations, it's really important to make sure that everybody understands that it's just a safe place. You can write what you want to write about. We are not going to laugh if someone, uses the wrong word or spells something wrong. No judgment. Everybody's here to support each other, and we're going to just give positive feedback and point things out in a positive way. If something hits you as a reader, even if you're another learner, you can say what you noticed, but you would definitely always want to do it in a positive way. Okay. Yeah, same point. But when we were working on, for instance, the learner to learner writings, everybody was busy in the library working on these because we would always have a deadline that we had to get everything edited by. And it was so great because we would take our drafts in, for instance, to the coordinator at the library, and the tutor would share that. And it was just so lovely because they would read it aloud. They would sometimes just be brought to tears by how beautiful the writing already was, even in draft form. And, getting that support, even, if you can expand that support outside of your learner-tutor relationship, but, encourage your learners to share with other people, someone in their family, perhaps, or a trusted person at work. And always making sure that people understand the purpose is to improve writing, not to judge where the person is at that moment. So
okay.
I like, oh, this you, Kath?
Yeah, but you know what? I can just read from your slides. That's fine.
Okay,
So,
I'll
yeah.
try and keep up.
Oh, thank you.
No, I mean, yes, that's fine.
Yeah. So, what are some ways that you can encourage your learners to write? So we've created this warm and fuzzy environment, but what are some actual strategies for eliciting writing? So going back to that, if you can think it, you can say it, you can write it. We know from brain research that it is a much easier process cognitively if you can think, speak, write. If you are just going from thinking to writing, it's harder, right? And so you are going to think, you're going to encourage your students to think what they want to write about, and then they're going to tell you. right? Share their ideas with you verbally, and then they're going to write it. And why do you think that that might be more helpful to them? What does saying it do? What is the benefit of saying it before they're writing it?
They can
There are several
organize.
benefits.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was gonna
Karen?
say they can organize their thoughts better.
Absolutely. They can organize their thoughts. Yeah. What else?
They're sort of rehearsing the vocabulary they might use.
Yeah, it's a rehearsal for them, right? And they're organizing their thoughts. They're getting an idea. Yeah.
Can I say something quickly too before you go on, Kath? Is you said coming up with what do they want to write about? And as someone else said, a lot of times the response you get is, I don't know. Or what would you like to write about? I don't know. They just don't really have the wealth of ideas ready at hand when you ask an open-ended question like that. So I think asking them to bring in pictures or reading a magazine or a story and then writing about something that you've already shared, or writing about an image, just taking a picture and writing about an image, something like that as a prompt rather than just out of thin air is helpful. That's
Yeah,
all.
and we're gonna cover that. So
Yeah, I know.
okay. So yeah, so if your learner writes something, you are not going to want to immediately correct, right? That is going to shut down your learner. It's going to be deflating. And so you would always just ask more questions, right? Oh, tell me more about that. Oh, I'm particularly interested in this part of what you wrote down. I'd love to know more about that. So you're going to elicit more writing, more information, more details. Absolutely. Correcting errors is the last thing. And then, you're not going to say, okay, our first writing activity is to write an essay or to, write something that is academic or very abstract. You're going to want to start off and build familiarity and confidence with topics that are personal and, comfortable for your learners. Next. And here's exactly what Marilyn was saying. Asking learners to write in response to a visual prompt, and we'll have an example of those coming up in some future slides. And one kind of visual prompt is photos on your phone. And Kathy just put that in the chat box. And absolutely, Kathy, what does everybody know? I mean, or what does everybody love to talk about? Yourself, your pets, your family, right? All of these things. And everybody now has a smartphone and everybody has photos on their phone, right? So this is just use it. I'm sure your learners bring their phones to class, and this is such a fun activity. I do it in my workshops. I say, okay, choose a photo that has meaning for you, and then share orally why that photo, why you chose that photo, why is it meaningful to you, what's going on in the photo, who is there, and then distill your thoughts and write a few sentences about that. And then we'll look for your kids, absolutely, your grandkids. We will look at examples of prompts that include sentence starters and story starters. And those are great because I don't know about you, but I do not love to write, and I have to do a lot of writing. And sometimes I am staring at the blank screen or the blank page, and it's like, I don't even know how to get started. And so sentence and story starters give you something to start with, right? You don't have to come up with something on your own. You can work off of them, and that can be very, very helpful. And writing in response to a compelling text. So say that your learner is a vegetarian, and maybe there was something in the newspaper about a factory farm, or about, you know, something that has to do with vegetarianism. So if you read that, and then you talk about it and then say, okay, I'd love to hear your ideas about that, or what do you think about that article? And so, you know, you find a text about something that they're very interested in or passionate about, and then you know, and again, it's the reading and writing connection. And so you're using that connection for that writing activity. Providing models of different kinds of texts. So it can be very daunting to try to write something if you're not a big reader and you've never really been exposed to a type of writing. So say you're a higher level learner and you've been asked to write a persuasive text or a persuasive essay. Well, if I've never read one, I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what I should be trying for. And so if before you ask for a certain type of writing or a poem, right? Oh my God, you know, poetry can be so fun with learners, right? But well, I've never read a poem, right? So, you know, read a bunch of different poems and then say, okay, you know, now you try to write one. You can use one type. You can, if you want to write a haiku, great, you know, use this as a model. And then sometimes if you are, you know, your learners don't really have the vocabulary, right? And so you can say, okay, you know, here are some vocabulary words. We've talked about them. We know the meanings of them. We've used them. We've worked with them in lots of different fun ways. I'd like you to write a story using these vocabulary words. So again, they don't have to come up with the idea. They don't have to, you know, with the words. You are providing them with half of the material that they need to write something. And then our senses provide powerful input into our brains. And so they can elicit some really fun writing activities. And I do a workshop called Writing from the Senses. And so I have activities that use each of the senses to as a prompt for writing activities. So the one that I take on the road a lot and that people really seem to enjoy is I take freshly ground coffee and I put it in a little snack bag, and I ask people to inhale the coffee grounds, and it really should be freshly ground, so that it has a nice strong aroma, and to sniff deeply, enjoy, and then write about a memory or an image or an experience or whatever reaction they have to sniffing that coffee. And it can be such a powerful, I just did this in Colorado a couple months ago, and you just would not believe the kinds of amazing writing, especially if a learner has grown up in a country that is a coffee producing country. Often people have memories of their parents or their grandparents. And even if people don't like coffee, right? They might have an aversion to the smell of coffee. They too can write something powerful. You can do it with taste. Yeah, you know, it just music, right? Listening to music, all kinds of wonderful things that you can experiment with. Next. Oh, yep. Next slide, Marilyn. Oh, we can't hear you, Marilyn.
I know, I'm sorry. I was trying to share something and I forgot to unmute. I
Oh,
want
okay.
to share with you that we stole your idea of the learning from the senses with the coffee.
Uh-huh.
And in our tutor training, this might be fun for some of you program people, that we would do that exercise, and we would have the tutors that in training pair up and use it as a springboard for a mind map. And that way they got to practice learning how to use a mind map with a, you know, learner tutor pair, one of them acting as the learner, one of them acting as the tutor, and then they would switch roles. But we used the coffee and it was so fun all of the different responses, and then we would have them read their little 3 to 4 sentences aloud. It was hilarious.
Oh, thank you. That's really great. I'm so glad to hear that. And so, yeah, we talked about graphic organizers when we were talking about comprehension. And there are lots of different graphic organizers available in that ARIA book there. And you can see graphic organizers are illustrations and different ways of organizing your thoughts with little amounts of text and a large amount of white space. And so often these graphic organizers can help you figure out what you want to write about. Okay, so there could be we'll look at mind maps, but like a bio poem, right? And so maybe a bio poem has K-A-T-H-Y, and I write adjectives that begin with each of those letters to describe myself. Okay, so that's an example. So this resource has wonderful templates that you can use for how to write poetry. And again, I when I hear the word poetry, I kind of shake in my boots because it seems inaccessible to me, but that is not correct. There are all kinds of really fun, very, very learner-friendly poems out there to read and to write. Marilyn has talked about learner writings, and so several programs in California have books of learner writings. I know Read Santa Clara and certainly the San Jose Public Library has a wonderful book of learner writings that they publish every year. So if your program does not publish learner writings, then ask on the listserv or ask your program coordinator if they can get some of those for you. So, and then participating in learner opportunities. So yes, so there are, encourage your learner to contribute to books of learner writings or blogs or, your program or your library's newsletter. There are social media posts that there are lots of informal, authentic ways that your learners can participate in public writing. And then I just heard yesterday from Bev at the State Library that there will be the Writers to Writers contest again this year. And this is just an amazing opportunity. And if you don't know about this, we're running behind, so I'm going to quickly say it, but I'm not quite sure of the timetable on this, but basically learners from all CLLS programs are invited to write to an author that they really admire or enjoy. And so they basically write to the author and tell their own story. And I was at a conference this spring, and some of the writers were there and they read their writings to the authors, and oh my gosh, get out the Kleenex. It is just so inspirational. So please, if you are a tutor, ask your program coordinator about that. And if you're a program staff, be on the lookout for that on the CLLS listserv. And please do encourage your learners and tutors to participate in that. We talked about a language experience approach, and there will be more information on that on Padlet. But basically, if your learner doesn't have the writing skills, or as Nicole pointed out, has dysgraphia, which is a kind of learning disability that limits your ability to write, then you can ask your learners to tell you the story, and then you act as their scribe. And so you write down the story just as they tell it to you, and then they read it back to you, and then they can copy it, or, lots of activities that you can do with that. And journals. Journals are a very liberating way to write. As we heard, sometimes they can be cathartic, especially personal journals or diaries. And the big thing about journals is that this is a correction-free zone. You do not ever, ever, ever correct anything in a journal. There are some cases where learners write in journals and the tutor never ever even sees it. It's just a great practice to do some writing. And I'm going to show you an example of a dialogue journal, but basically it's just a conversation in writing between a learner and a tutor that gives the tutor an opportunity to model correct mechanics such as spelling and grammar and punctuation and capitalization without correcting. It's a very indirect way of correcting or helping a learner improve their writing. A gratitude journal
Sorry, I thought you were ready.
is great because Marilyn talked about that negative self-talk, right? And replacing negative thoughts with positive thoughts. So many times our learners come to us with a deficit model, right? I don't have this, I don't have this, I don't have this. Well, what do you have? And what are you grateful for? There are so many things. So if we can make that shift from negative thinking to positive thinking, and it has a great impact on so many areas of our learners' lives, especially learning. And so keeping a gratitude journal or a journal of good things, we have a video on that has an example of this, keeps those positive thoughts. Also is a great way to write. A learning journal, what are you learning, right? Just keep a record of everything that we've been doing, and you're learning independently and in our lessons. And you know what? I'm not going to talk about the circular or cliffhanger journal because I actually have never used that, and I can't remember what it is, and I couldn't find it.
I've
Do you
used- yeah, it's quick. I'll try and keep it quick because I know we're running on time. Basically, it's a shared journal. So I used it as a warm up with my learner. Every time we sat down, we started our lesson with this journal. We pull it out. I would write a question. The learner would write an answer, and then I would write another question, and then he would write another answer. Maybe that was it for the warm up. That's the circular journal.
Well, thank you.
The cliffhanger journal is just, you can write a sentence and then the learner has to come up with the next sentence. So it's sort of like, the man, it could be totally fictional. The man walked down the sidewalk and he saw a dog sitting in the park. And then the learner has to come up with the next sentence. Cool.
Great. Thank you. Oh, and then I think the journal of lists, that was also something that was your idea, right?
Yeah, I actually we did a workshop on this, all the different kinds of lists, and I'll add that to the Padlet. Oh gosh. Yeah, it's really fun. I found it online, and it's a woman had come up with, it's very positive, sort of like the gratitude journal. All the different kinds of lists that a learner can make. And then we encouraged all of our tutors to try using it in one of their next sessions, and they did, and they found it helpful.
Great. So this, I don't know if you can see this very well, but this is an example of a dialogue journal. And if you notice, the learner has misspelled some words like fireworks and beautiful. And so the tutor intentionally chooses to respond using those words so that the learner can very, very gently see, oh, right, okay, fireworks is spelled with an O, not an E. And beautiful is a crazy word, how it's spelled. And so I see that's how you spell beautiful. And you can see that the learner misspelled favorite, but then self-corrected. So that's always a great thing when the learner can identify their mistakes before you say anything and then correct them. Okay. So more writing strategies, prompts. So I'm going to show you an example of sentence starters, story starters. We talked about photos. Personal photos, of course, are always best because it's easier to write about something that is already something that you know and in your life. but there are wonderful examples of published photos, and we're going to take a look at some of those. Have any of you used wordless picture books as prompts for writing? There are just some great, beautiful illustrations. They don't need to be childish. I don't know if any of you know of the author and illustrator Chris Van Allsburg, but he has some weird and wonderful images that are just terrific.
We have a list of those on the Padlet too.
Good.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. We
Mhm.
talked about compelling texts and we talked about the five senses. So here's an example of sentence starters. So you provide the first words in the sentence, and that provides the idea, the topic, and then the learner just has to finish it. And so a much easier task than having to write a sentence and come up with the idea for the sentence on your own. Okay, next. And that is different than story starters, where you actually provide a little bit more inspiration, a little bit more text, and the theme of the story. So this, we have a complete first sentence. You could even have a complete second sentence, but then the learner needs to carry on and tell more of the story. And you can make these up on your own, and you can have it to do with something that you know that your learner's interested in. So here are some examples of some published photos that are very evocative. And the New York Times has a wonderful weekly series where they're uncaptioned photos, and Marilyn will put this in the Padlet. It's super fun. So you look at the photo and you try to think, what the heck is going on, right? Where is that? And what are these two men doing with a taxi load full of balloons, right? And so you can create a caption, you can tell a story, you can, have a dialogue between the two guys in the taxi. You can do all kinds of fun writing activities. And then the next week, the caption is revealed and you learn what really was going on. This, I love. Oh, yeah, go ahead to the next slide. Here we have I think it's like a Mexican wrestler in a subway, and everybody's reaction to him. And it looks like maybe the guy on the floor, they were wrestling. Okay, next one. So funny. And why the heck is this group playing orchestral or cello to a bunch of cows in a barn, right? So these are just, I mean, you could come up with all kinds of fun, wacky explanations of this and stories. Next. A bunch of golden retrievers in front of a dilapidated castle, right? Where are you? What's going on? Who has all these dogs, right? Are they different owners? Or are they the same person? Okay. Next.
Oh, that's a thing, in all different cities.
Oh,
Golden Retriever days.
oh, I didn't know that.
They try and beat each other's records for the most number of dogs assembled, all Goldens.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for explaining.
Sure.
And then this is evidently there was something in the news every year on a day in Paris. I think that there is a race for waiters, and they try to cross the finish line without spilling their glass of water. And who knows what's happening with the croissant, but again, just a fun, evocative, provocative photo. Oh, and Joy says these would also be great for conversation prompts for ESL learners and groups. Absolutely. You're very, very, very good idea. Okay. So what are some other writing strategies? Free writing and quick writes. Again, this is a no correction zone. And so either you provide the topic or you ask your learners to write whatever they want to write about. 3 to 5 minutes. You just, I've tried this with my learners, and they said, oh, we loved it. It felt really freeing because we knew you weren't even going to look at it, but it gave us an opportunity to just write. And so just very fast. There's you think for 1 minute and then write for 3 minutes. Okay. Mapping semantic maps. We're going to look at that in the next slide. Actually, can you go to the next slide, Marilyn, and we'll just take a little quickie preview. This is a mind map, right? So we've been talking about mind maps or semantic maps. And so if any of you are unfamiliar with this, the red circle in the middle is your main idea, your topic, right? And that will eventually become the topic sentence or the main sentence. And then you say, let's say the topic is gardening, right? And then the 4 blue circles are sub ideas. You're going to go from there. Well, what do I want to do? There's vegetable gardening, there's cut flower gardening, there's succulent gardening, and there's topiary gardening, right? And so those are my four ideas that I want to talk about in the story that I'm going to be writing about for gardening. And then you can see that there are green circles that then are providing ideas for those 4 subtopics, right? So what do I want to say about vegetable gardening? I don't have much sun, so I can only grow vegetables that grow well in the shade, or I want to use my horse's manure as fertilizer, so I don't want to buy it, whatever it is. So you can see that you start from a central idea and then you expand, and this is helping you organize your thoughts and providing a free form outline. So this is how I think. I am just like all over the place, okay? If you go back to the previous slide, Marilyn, other people are much more linear, right? And so maybe you create a list of the ideas that you want to cover in your writing piece. Outlining is an even more detailed way. And, we probably all had to create an outline in high school when we were writing our first, research paper, our first term paper. So you have a topic, you have subtopics, and it can get very, very detailed. So these are all things that will help a learner get their ideas out and onto the page and organized. Now, for a beginning level learner, I might not do outlining, right? I might stick with mind mapping and listing. So, choose what is appropriate for the task and for the level of your learner. We talked about asking those defining questions. They could be who, what, where, why, when, how. And then pros and cons is a way. So, maybe your learner is interested in adopting a dog. Okay, well, let's think that through. What are the pros of adopting a dog and what are the cons of adopting a dog, right? And that's an authentic writing task that is also a critical thinking task. Okay, next slide.
Good use of a T-chart.
Yeah. Okay, we saw that. And then, also there's just writing for everyday life, right? And so, grocery lists, if I don't have a grocery list, I get home and I have forgotten 4 items, right, that I intended to buy. And so a lot of our learners who are not used to writing, they keep everything in their heads and they're really, really good at it. Their memories are incredible. But I've had learners tell me the older I get, the less I'm able to do that. And it is exhausting. Imagine if you had to keep everything in your memory instead of writing things down. And so writing your tasks, your to-do list, writing notes, filling out forms is a huge thing. I know that if I go quickly, sometimes I make mistakes filling out forms. This is a huge an important thing. If your learner needs to go to the hospital, if they need to apply for a job, if they need to fill out forms for their child's school, and they do it incorrectly, it can have serious consequences. So that's a real life writing activity that you could work on if it's something your learner's interested in. Some people still write checks. I do. That is a skill that's a real life one. Applications, right? Many people come to us because they want to get a job or to get a better job. And then a resume. And Marilyn was sharing a story that the Syrian women that she's working with, they were applying for some jobs that you wouldn't normally think would need a resume, but now today, yeah, everything is more bureaucratic, right? And so knowing how to write a resume, and ooh, who told me? Somebody used Chat GPT or an AI to write a resume. Was that you, Marilyn?
Yeah, we did it for our tutor training. Mhm.
Oh yeah, and you said it was amazing what it came up with the form for you, right?
The only instruction I gave it was write a basic resume for a non-English speaking woman with limited work experience. That's all I said. And it came out with a unformatted form, but it was very detailed. It had all the components that you would need for any kind of a resume. And then it actually gave prompts as to what goes in those fields so that it could help the learner know what was appropriate to write in those fields. And I just took all of that text and put it in a Word document and formatted it so it looked better. And she was able to, or we were able to present that as a template for our tutors. It was super easy. Took about a minute.
And that's a great example of how we as tutors and teachers can use AI to help us. But also, if we teach our learners how to use AI, then it creates independence and they also have the tools to help them improve their writing. Okay, next slide. Okay, now we've gotten our learners to write. They are feeling comfortable. They're feeling confident. They know what they want to write about. And now they're writing. So how do we provide feedback? Okay, this is really, really important because this can encourage our learners and motivate them to write more. And it can also discourage them. And so we want to be very, very, very intentional and mindful of how we provide feedback. And so the best way and the thing that you want to do first is to see if learners can identify their own errors. And so they often do this if they have the opportunity to read what they wrote silently, and then you can ask them to read it to you aloud. And sometimes they can identify, oh, wait, I left this part out. That doesn't make sense. I forgot to say, or, I needed a transition there. And so that's part of revision, right? Where they're trying to say, okay, is everything logical? Am I giving my story to the reader in a way that they can make sense of it? So they can often do that if they read it aloud and silently. And then often your ear picks up what your eye doesn't. Your eye knows what your brain wants to say. And so often your eye actually fills in what is missing, but your ear doesn't. And so often if you ask your learner to read what they wrote out loud, they can say, oops, I needed a comma there because I paused when I read that and I didn't have that. Or, oh, you know what? That word is bat, not bait. And so they can figure it out that way. Okay. Next. What we've been talking about all along, errors are part of writing, right? They're part of everything we do in life. It's an opportunity to learn and improve. When you're first discussing a learner's writing, do not focus on the mechanics. Don't worry about the spelling, the grammar, the sentence structure, the punctuation or capitalization. Focus on the content. The most important thing is having your learner express themselves effectively on paper, getting their ideas down on the page. And then you don't want to correct everything. That would be absolutely overwhelming. And so you want to look for error patterns. What are some some errors that they keep making, right? They make over and over and over again these mistakes. And what are the most important errors that actually will impair somebody's ability to understand what they're trying to say? So you might have a learning target. So you're going to say, okay, my learner did not consistently use ed or the simple past tense, and that creates confusion. Wait, did this happen in the past? Did it happen in the future? Did it happen now? I'm totally lost because the verb phrases are all over the place. So for this learning target, for this lesson, we're just going to look at the verb endings, right? And the verb tenses. That's our learning target for this day. And then again, when we're giving that elaborated feedback, it's positive and then constructive and then positive. We want to end and start on a positive note. And then remember going back to how adults learn best, providing elaborated feedback. So not, oh, that was great. I really like that. That isn't helpful. You did a wonderful job of capitalizing every first letter of every sentence. And the images that you used, I could see what was happening because you used great adjectives and adverbs, and giving very specific, positive, constructive, immediate feedback. Next. Okay. We talked about this, the red ink. I once had a teacher in my workshop say, oh, when my students give me a piece of writing, I turn it back and I tell them, I'm going to make your papers bleed. And I thought, oh, I would not want to be your student, right? Why would you do that to somebody? So it is not helpful, and it's extremely discouraging to correct every single error, right? And to do it in red. A lot of us have a lot of negative experiences with the red. We talked about, green, highlighting in green for areas you need to grow, and gold for areas that you're already glowing, and using emojis. And somebody added on Tuesday, and stickers as gentle and fun symbols of feedback. I think that's a great idea. Next.
I already did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, writing conferences. We're going to add this. Marilyn, remind me. There is a great video on what a writing conference looks like. So of course, if you're tutoring just one learner, you have that opportunity, to just really, really intensely discuss a piece of writing. If you're working in a small group or a class, that would happen where you pull the learner out and then you talk individually about that learner's piece of writing.
Yeah,
And
we have a really good video for the writing conference.
Oh, we do already have it? Oh, great. Okay.
I think we'll talk about that, but it'll go on Padlet if you agree. Okay.
Terrific. Great. And then, often I don't know what I'm missing, right? I don't know how to monitor myself. And self-monitoring is part of what we want our learners to be able to do. It builds independence and self-sufficiency. Checklists and writing rubrics can really provide guidelines for our learners. It helps them get into the habit of checking for different aspects of what they are doing when they're writing. And so we'll have some checklists and some writing rubrics on the Padlet for you. And often, if you're you're teaching a learner to give feedback or to ask for feedback, that is learned, right? That is not something that we are born with. And so you need to model that for your learner to help them understand how to ask for feedback so that they're really getting the information that is helpful to them. And then especially if you have a small group or class, to help them know how to give feedback to their peers is also very helpful. Next. Here's just a very simple example of a writing rubric. And so it provides phrases for learners to think about. Oh, say more about this. Leave this part out. It didn't really fit in with the story. This part's good. Let's leave this part. I like the idea behind this sentence, but I want to change the wording. Okay. Cross this out and say it in a different way. Okay, so we'll have more examples of that. And then we have run out of time for this segment, but we're going to have this on the Padlet, and this is an example, a real life example of a learner's drafts. Walter was a student in a program that I coordinated in Chicago. And years ago, the Reader's Digest Lila Wallace Foundation had, I think it was the first National Book of Learner Writings. And so they asked learners from programs across the country to submit pieces of writing. And so Walter really, really wanted to put a piece in that book. And so he worked with his tutor, Amy Prevedel, who some of you might know because she was a CLLS coordinator. And so they worked together over the course of several weeks. And what I'd like for you to do, and this is your sort of home practice, is to take a look at the entries there by date and everything that we've talked about so far this morning about writing. Think about what feedback did Amy provide the learner. So if you see the iterations of this writing, what questions did she ask? What feedback did she give? What corrections did she suggest? And you could go to the next slide. And so you can see that, he's added things. And so that was probably in response to Amy asking a defining question of him. And so you can kind of see an example of what is the recommended strategy for providing feedback. And I'll give you a little hint. There's a whole little paragraph at the bottom that disappears from the published text, and it was published. And the last slide, the next slide,
This is
I think it's the next one.
okay.
Yeah, that's the actual publish. You can see it's actually shorter. So there are some things that were deleted, and that's so painful because it's taken you so hard to write, right? You don't want to delete anything. And so what do you think Amy did to encourage the learner to delete some of what he'd originally written, and what rationale do you think she gave him for that? So that's something to think about for your home practice. Okay.
And I want to add that we do have a really long but excellent video of Amy using that same text with the same learner, working with 2 tutors and showing them how to provide feedback the way that she would with Walter, using that same text. So if you go through those slides that Kathy just skimmed over and also watch the video with Amy, it's fantastic as far as providing feedback and helping someone develop their final draft.